Greetings, everyone. My name is Tony Holowitz, and I am doing this podcast, or what I'm calling here the DadCast, because I am trying to teach my three sons how to act. And just to put a little information behind that, I have been using Act software for years. I've been teaching Act software for years. I've created more than 400 training videos, and it occurred to me that the nature of Act is it really doesn't appeal to a younger audience. And as my sons were getting out in the world, I said, there might be needs for them to use this software. And I said, if I can take some ideas for teaching younger people how to use the software and use my three sons as sort of the model for doing that and using their needs to use something like ACT as a way to sort of get into this process, to teach them, and also to make this training something that a younger person could relate to, that's sort of hard. And I never realized how nervous I'd be when I was creating these tutorials specifically for my sons. I feel pressure. I feel like, man, I want to nail this. I want to get it great. And I'm not sure if I'll do that, but I'm trying. And I'll make mistakes along the way, but I'm going to keep trying. It occurred to me that a story that I mentioned briefly was sort of how I got to this point in my career of teaching ACT. And I also thought about, if you asked my sons what I did, would they be able to tell you? They might be able to tell you I'm an ACT teacher. I work with ACT software, but I don't know if they could tell you much more than that. So thinking about this stuff, I said, I've got to try to put this down on a video. And a video really wasn't something I felt I could do. So I said, well, maybe I'll just create a podcast and just talk a little bit about sort of what this series is about and what I hope they'll take away from this. And there were a couple things that really stood out to me. One was, many years ago, I attended a luncheon. And this really sort of formed my opinion about how I go about teaching ACT software and other software as well. And at this luncheon, this was, again, 30 years ago, it's when computers were really just sort of hitting, businesses and individuals. They were still really expensive. But the person who was speaking said something I never forgot. He said, if you're disorganized before you get a computer, you're going to be disorganized after you get a computer. And he stated a computer is just a tool, and you've got to use that tool in a way that helps you become organized. And he said they're two separate things. And at the time, I think a lot of people thought computers, just by their very nature, was going to help you stay organized. And I've learned through the years that's not the case. So I've always sort of built my ACT training practice on that premise. It's not about the computer. And if someone asked my sons, what is it your dad does? Again, I think they might be able to say, hey, he teaches ACT software to people. But I'm not sure if they could say more than that. And if you ask me what I've done and why I've been doing this for so long, I would say this. I don't really teach ACT software. Yeah, that's a little part of it. But most of what I do is I teach people how to look at ACT and let it tell them a story. In other words, I look at what they have in ACT, how they work with ACT, and I help them get a little more organized so they can take what they have in it and put it to better use. I teach them how to get organized from an ACT point of view. And it's astounding to me through all the years how many highly successful people I've worked with that frankly are not that organized as it comes to ACT. They have all this data in there, all these contacts, and a lot of them they don't even know exist. They don't reach out to them, they don't call them, they don't email them. So a lot of times what I do is I just sort of break it down for them and I show them what is in their ACT database. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I think it's important to realize that you have to have a plan. And one of the things that I talk to about my clients is I have a very simple plan as I try to teach and talk to them about. And I call it the 3 Monday plan. Before you really make the most out of ACT, you have to have a plan. And I try to get people to think about, okay, what is it they have to do every single Monday when they come into the office? Now, granted, your Monday could be a Wednesday or a Friday. It doesn't matter. But the point is this. What is it that once a week on a Monday you have to do? It might be you have to call all your prospects. It might be you have to call your most important clients. So every Monday there are certain things you have to do. Maybe if you've done business the week before, you've got to make sure to get your invoices out or record your time so it doesn't get lost. These are things that need to be written down on paper. Then the second Monday is, what do you do every first Monday of the month? What are those things you only do monthly? Make a list, write them down, put it on paper, and now you have a plan starting to build. And then last but not least, what are those things you do every quarter? Just once every 3 months. Maybe it's send an email out to your prospects. Maybe it's follow up with your clients. Now that 3 months could be 6 months or a year. It doesn't really matter, but the point being, what is your plan? What are your goals? And if you sort of think this through, and I can help you with this, and I can help you think this through, and this is where I do a lot of my training, is just getting people to commit to doing something on a regular basis. And if you do that, at the end of the day, what that does is it makes sure no one slips through the cracks. So as it relates to my son, and I'm thinking of my son John, who's the freelance, maybe he sends out a quarterly email to people with a video in it of some of the work he's done. My son Brian, who's just coming out of college, he might say, you know what, I'm just going to reach out to people and say, hey, do you have any good advice for my industry, anything I could learn about? Even if it's to people at competing companies where he has a job once he gets that job. What could he do just to stay in touch? Maybe there's associations or organizations or networking he could be doing. My son Matt, who is really in a position right now where he doesn't need this software, it's more just to keep track of contacts. If nothing else, maybe once a quarter he looks up some of his friends or colleagues or future employers and just reaches out to them and says hello. Shoots them a quick text or an email and makes it so that he stays in touch with them. So each son is going to have a different approach and a different plan, but the key is writing it down on paper before you ever sit down in front of ACT. And I think if you do that, if you sort of organize your thoughts, then ACT can be a really effective tool. If you don't have those thoughts or if you don't have a plan in place, it's really hard to take this tool that might have at some point hundreds if not thousands of contacts and make the best use of them. So one of the things that they will learn as they start getting into this is, as we've started the training, I've first just sort of had an opening video that I talked a little bit, but then I showed them what ACT looks like. They have desktop software and cloud software. Then I showed them how to log into the cloud version. Then I talked about entering the first contact into ACT, just so you could see how that works. And also I tried to convey that you could import contacts, so you might have contacts in a different place. Then I talked about, okay, now you have all these contacts in there. How do you find people as you need them? How do you do a lookup? And all these things come together because as you start to build your data in ACT, that plan that I talked about, the 3 Monday plan, will ensure that no contact slips through the cracks. But the next part of the training in the next video I'm going to create is about something called the ID status in ACT. And the ID status is simply a field that allows you to define who people are. And for example, in a sales environment, you have prospects. If you're in business, you have clients. So based on that Monday plan, how often do you want to reach out to your clients? Maybe you want to call them. Maybe you want to email them. Maybe you want to text them or visit them. However you do that, how do you find those clients and keep track of it? So fundamentally, if you have all this stuff in ACT, all these contacts, if you can't find them easily based on who they are, be it prospects, clients, maybe it's something personal, okay, family, friends. Maybe it's a vendor where you have to pay your bills. All this stuff, how do you find this information easily? That's where the ID status field comes in. And I've always said it's the most important field in ACT. I cannot tell you how many of my clients, when I look at their database, if I ask them a simple question like, can you do a lookup of all your clients? Or can you do a lookup of all your prospects? They cannot do that. So what they've lacked through time and what I try to help them with is basic organization of their data so that they can find things quickly, they can take action, and make sure no one slips through the cracks. And at the end of the day, when you have a lot of data, it's got to be easy to work with, it's got to be easy to find, and you've got to be able to make a decision on how you want to react to what's right in front of you. You might decide you don't want to do anything, and that's fine as well. But the key here is making sure that you can find relevant information. And that takes some work, it takes some planning, it takes some thought, and as we go on, I'm going to show you some steps that will allow you to do that. So we've got a lot of things we can talk about here. I'm going to sort of lay down some of the fundamentals, and at some point I'm going to sort of walk away from the My Three Sons training and direct them to my other training. But I'm using this just to sort of lay down a foundation based on some things I think they need to learn about. And on occasion, I might throw in a dadcast where it's more just talking instead of showing. But let's move on. Let's get forward. Let's think about how we can make this work for you. And the great thing about ACT is if you have different needs, like all three sons are going to have different needs and things they do, you can adapt ACT to exactly what their needs are. You can add information, add fields to hold different information that adapts to the way they work. And this is going to be something that through time, hopefully, will help them be more successful in their future endeavors. So let me move forward. I want to thank you for listening to this, and I hope everyone has a great day. Be well, my friends.